welcome back to episode 5 of Avayat Studio Goes to Space. So here we have a little probe launch here, and this is going to be the first part of our communications network. So in here, in that payload fairing there, we've got 3 relay probes with some of the early relay antennas. Now, they're not very strong. They don't have a very great range, and they probably won't give us communications that are great past probably about the moon. But it will be something, and we'll be able to actually fly some probes and have greater connection than we've been able to before. So we will still have to worry about, communication blackouts and horizons and stuff like that. But it'll be a lot easier for near Kerman operations. So getting up into a bit of a steep launch here. We've got the 2.5 meter parts that we unlocked with the science from the last episode. And yeah, we're spinning out of control. It's not particularly aerodynamic, but this thing has tons of fuel. So up there on the upper stage, we've got the 2.5 meter low profile engine from B9, which I believe is intended for use on landers, but it makes a pretty good upper stage in general. And yeah, there you can see the 3 satellites we've got. So each one of them is equipped with some of those smaller low distance antennas. That's just so we can have communications without having to deploy the antennas in case we went over the horizon. And those antennas with the dishes that are currently folded up right now, those are our actual relay antennas. And so those, they're called like the high gain antennas, but they have a much longer range and they can actually handle relays. So I'm going a little bit unconventional here. I'm not going into a direct circular orbit and then boosting up in what's known as a Hohmann transfer. I'm just going directly to geostationary altitude, or kerbostationary, which for Kerbin is about 2,863 kilometers. Now, I'm not, for this one I'm being pretty careful and precise, but it's not really that important. The key is, at this altitude, a mostly circular orbit has a period of about 6 hours, or 1 Kerbin day. And what that does is it allows you to put anything into orbit and it'll stay at basically the same position over the ground, which is not really useful for Kerbal Space Program. Honestly, it's just a better idea to kind of take the Starlink approach and then just launch a ton of satellites all over low Kerbin orbit, and then you have a nice network of constellation of communication satellites. Geostationary orbits are really only useful if you have things like fixed antennas on the ground and you want to be able to point and receive satellite information for things like TV or communications without needing to build a dish that can track, which is really easy when you have this kind of orbit because you can just find where the satellite is in the sky and just point it there because it's not going to move very much. Now, it is important that you stay pretty close to an equatorial orbit, otherwise it will kind of oscillate up and down and appear to move in a circle from the ground. But it's not that important for Kerbal Space Program because all the dishes automatically track and you don't actually have to care about pointing them in a direction. So now, we've deployed the first one into this orbit, and what I want to do is space them about 60 degrees apart. So we're going to have these 3 satellites evenly spaced in a circular orbit. So what I do here is I slow down, and the key thing here is my orbital period. So now it's about 4 hours. So when we complete a full orbit, now I'm 2 hours ahead of it in a 6-hour orbit, which means a third of the way forward, or about 60 degrees. And now we boost back up into a circular orbit so that we can deploy the other satellite. And we're just going to rinse and repeat this process until we've got our network of satellites spaced in thirds. This is probably a pretty inefficient way to do it, but we have tons of fuel on this launcher. We could probably land this thing on Duna with the amount of fuel that we have. But going to geostationary orbit is very expensive delta V-wise. It's not very easy to get there. A lot of early actual satellites in the real history of spaceflight that went to geostationary orbit, some of them failed to do so. A lot of them failed to do so because geostationary orbit is something that is pretty hard to reach. And as it happens, with these satellites that I have just launched, they actually can't talk to each other. So there's 2 that are on the horizon and visible from the Kerbal Space Center. Those have fine connection. Those can talk to the Space Center just fine, and they're able to talk a little bit to each other. That third one that doesn't see the Space Center is basically just dead because it is so far away that it cannot see either one of the other satellites. So here we go again with some new probes. Everything here is exactly the same, except I have added 2 antennas to each satellite instead of just the one that we had before. And now I'm just coasting up a little bit so we don't spin out of control and lose everything that we just worked hard for because of the aerodynamics. And we flip anyway. I will probably have to revise this launch design, although I suppose once I unlock better antennas, I'll have to have bigger launchers anyway, and it won't be that much of an issue. So we continue in the same deal, just launch directly into that geostationary transfer orbit and not really care about going into Kerbin orbit, which is less efficient because we are still fighting gravity. You can see as much as you're pointed up, proportional to some trig factor, I guess, cosine of the angle, I think. I can't really do that in my head. But the more you point upwards, the closer you are to pointing away from the ground, the more you're going to lose fighting gravity. Which is why it's 2.2 kilometers per second orbital speed for Kerbin, but you need about 3.5 kilometers per second to actually launch into orbit, because not only is there the atmosphere, but you are fighting gravity part of the way up. So we get up there. The exact number, again, doesn't exactly matter. Just the rough timing. And you can see we come up right next to that other one. So what I'm going to do here is, because I want to be between these satellites that are spaced 2 hours apart, and I have 3, I'm going to do the same 2-hour interval, but staggered with 1 hour with respect to the ones that I've already launched. So here we go into a 6-hour orbit, and then I boost it to a 7-hour orbit, or 1 day and 1 hour. So that way, I'll come down right between the 2 relay satellites that I've already launched, as you can see there. And this puts us basically directly overhead the KSC, which is also just a nice touch. Makes it feel a bit more symmetrical. And there you can see we've got a nice communications with the other 2 satellites. Just circularize the orbit so that we can deploy this relay. And there it goes there. And then once we've done that, pointed in the right way, we can just slow back down into a 4-hour orbit and do the same drill as before. We don't need to worry about staggering them by 1 hour because we're already in that position. So once we do this, we're going to come up 2 hours away from the one that we just launched and 1 hour away from the ones that we launched on the first time. Just like that. So with this, we're going to have a rough hexagon-shaped relay network, which, is not really that important, but it looks nice and it is satisfying to see once it's all done. So we just get back up and circularize our orbit here and get ready to deploy the last satellite. There it is there. And it's talking to the other one that the other 2 antenna relay that we deployed. And now for the last one, I have to actually use this upper stage. There was an upper stage on this, which on its own has about a little over 2 kilometers per second of delta V. So there's tons of fuel in this thing. But, going into geostationary orbit is very expensive for delta V. If you plan everything right and you don't overbuild your vehicles, it takes about as much fuel to go to turbostationary orbit as it would to land on the moon. Speaking of landing on the moon, Angee Kerman here is going to fly this, the largest vessel we have ever created, and he is going to land this on the surface of the moon. It will be a great step forward in our program. We will make history with this mission. And just as a bit of a challenge, I'm going to try and fly this entirely from IVA mode. So you can see we're inside the fairing there, but looking out the window is not that helpful anyway. So you can see a bit of the lander there inside the fairing, tucked away. We'll be able to see it more once the fairings are out and we actually land this thing. And we have some cameras out there to help us, actually see where we're going. And then we've got the nav ball there. There's so much information in this IVA. This is the improved IVA mod. This is not stock. In stock, it's still possible to fly and land on the moon from IVA. It's just much harder, and you have to take some other steps to make it easier for yourself. But, I'm getting my flight engineer configured there so that I have all the information ready to access. So for the early stuff, we really just need delta V, orbital information, and just to be able to see where we're going. And then for setting up the maneuvers, there's probably a way to do it inside the command, or inside from here, but I haven't figured that out, so I'm probably just going to have to use map mode for that. So there are contracts: orbit the moon, plant a flag on the moon, and get data from the surface of the moon, all of which we can do with this one mission here. Just checking all our resources. We are just going on the 3 days of life support that's built in, so we do have a bit of a timer here. But we are ready to launch. Throttle up and light those engines. And we are off. So for this early phase of the launch, once we're still low in the atmosphere, accelerating about 1.3 Gs, which is slow for Kerbal Space Program, but is actually pretty realistic. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait until we've built a good amount of speed and then start our gravity turn and pitch over that way. I usually like to wait until I get above about 60 meters per second surface speed, or until my apoapsis is showing above about 1 kilometer, because then I know I'm not going to be going too shallow as long as I don't pitch over too quickly. I'm not really watching the delta V that much. I have those 2 boosters there on the side that are feeding their fuel into the center stage there, so we'll have more delta V that way. And I've gone through all of this stuff. We have plenty of delta V with just the 2 boosters. We don't need to do a whole asparagus staging for all around the edges there, but I'll probably end up needing that for heavier landers in the future. I also didn't need to fit the whole thing into the fairing there, but it was a fun challenge for the design. So yeah, you can see now I'm starting to pitch over a bit at about 1.5 kilometers altitude. Apoapsis is showing almost 2.5 kilometers, which is still pretty low, and we're going about 130 meters per second at this time, which is kind of slow, but we will get up to speed in due time. So we're just coasting on the way up, really trying to be careful here. I might be going a little bit shallow, 3 kilometers, and then about 20-30 degrees down. The goal that I'm trying to go for, that's generally a good rule of thumb, is in your gravity turn you reach 45 degrees of pitch at about 10 kilometers altitude. Although it is kind of easy to misjudge and think, oh, I'm going too shallowly, I should probably not pitch down so much. Except the air gets thinner and you build up speed, so you can get to 10 kilometers pretty quickly after about 5. And speaking of 5 kilometers, there we are now. Surface speed close to 300 meters per second, which is about Mach 1, and we've got about 600 meters per second left in those boosters there. Once we stage, we'll have another kilometer per second, and that should be enough to get us most of the way into orbit, although I figure that will take a pretty long burn period to do. Those fairings auto-deploy at 50 kilometers, but we are a long way away from there, coming up on 8 kilometers altitude now, 500 meters per second left. And yeah, you can see the plume starting to expand now from the what's it called, the camera there, external camera. And yeah, now I'm at 10 kilometers altitude and I am going a little bit steeper out of the atmosphere than I would like, so I start pitching over just a little more. In a few seconds, we're gonna stage those side intakes. The game is running a good bit slower, probably like 2 or 3 times slower than real time, which is why this is taking such a long time to do. But we were gonna get there anyways. 500 meters per second, 13 kilometers altitude, 150 meters per second left, pulling about 2 Gs here, which is all par for the course. And we're gonna stage those engines. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and there they go. I just love the alarm sounds that we get when we get those cutoffs or low thrust to weight. And my thrust to weight ratio is this one, which is less than ideal. But we are going sideways now, which means about 40% of our speed is going to be, 40% of our thrust is going into our sideways speed, which does mean that we have only 40% of our 0.9 thrust to weight ratio, or our 0.9 Gs there, that are actually going into fighting gravity. But we're high enough and fast enough that, honestly, I think we'll be able to make it most of the way into orbit. And we are burning that fuel, so we are getting lighter. Our thrust-to-weight ratio is higher than 1 now, but our G-force is less than 1. And I think that's due to aerodynamic forces acting to slow us down, but I could be wrong. I'm not sure where that 1/10 of a G is going. It could just also be that our engine is improving in performance as we get out of the atmosphere more and more. So we're now at about 30 kilometers, 750 meters per second sideways. This stage is not going to have enough delta V to get us all the way into orbit, but it will be close enough that we will not be taking a ton of fuel out of our transfer stage. And I really overbuilt this vehicle. There's tons of delta V on this. I think if I was not flying an IBA, and then I could be really precise and careful with how I was flying, I could probably land on the moon and then also visit it in this as well. But we want some margins here. Angee Kerman would probably, I've never spoken to him myself, but I don't think he would want to be stranded on the moon. Because he would probably run out of snacks, and I don't think Kerbals handle that very well. Or oxygen, or water. They tend to kind of need those things to survive. But, yeah, we're going now. Our speed indicator has switched over to orbital mode. So 1 kilometer per second orbital velocity. It's pretty simple from here on out. We really just have to ride the stage the rest of the way into orbit, and then from there we can just plan our approach, and we'll have to land on the moon. So now 40 kilometers altitude, now getting oriented, just spinning this around a little so we can appreciate the view out the camera there. And maybe at another time I'll actually fly this same vehicle again, just so we can see all the same stuff but from an external viewpoint, which will also probably be a lot easier for me. Honestly, there's no real reason that I'm flying an IBA. It's just for fun. It's just a nice challenge. So yeah, we're coming close to the 50 kilometer mark, and at that point the fairings are going to stage, and we'll be able to actually see some things. If you look through on Apollo 11, I believe, when they were launching, because it's like a capsule with 3 guys sitting on a couch, and for most of the launch, the escape tower would have this shield that went on top of the capsule, and so there was a hatch in it that they could go in and out of through, but there were no windows, so the windows of the capsule were covered by this escape tower cover. And there's a moment in the launch when they jettison the first stage and they also eject the tower. You could hear Mike Collins, who was sitting in the right side seat. As the fairings go, he said, "They finally gave me a window to look out of, just like we have here." He was the only one who didn't have a window. So we're coming close to the end of this stage's usefulness to us. This engine has provided us with a very long burn, 3 minutes almost, and we'll probably go a little bit over that. It has carried us a good portion of the way into orbit. Although we are still pretty deep in the atmosphere, this is a very shallow trajectory. And you can see that I'm pointing above the prorate vector, just so that I don't fall back and I can actually get out of the atmosphere with this thing. Now, not a lot of fuel left in this thing, about 30 seconds left, although that is 30 seconds at this slower runtime, which is probably closer to a minute. And I'm looking for my apoapsis to get to about 80 kilometers, which may actually happen before the engine burns out, about 60 kilometers altitude. I think at the speed we're going and the altitude we're traveling at, it's not really a concern that I'll slow down too much. About 80, 90 kilometer orbit is good. There, our apoapsis past 80. I'm reading off the indicator of the top there, provided by Flight Engineer. Now, I could use MechJeb, but honestly, it's more fun to fly these things by hand. MechJeb is really only helpful for things like realism overhaul, where you have a lot of chance of failure, and it's very important to be consistent. But with this, I have lots of room for error. Yeah, let's switch the camera. You can see just the sneak peek down along the length of the lander there. But you'll have to wait until we're on the moon to see the whole entire thing there. Admire the view. We're still inside the atmosphere at this point, but we can roll around. We can look at the clouds casting their shadows on the planet below us. There is a trick that you can use, which is to point along your prograde vector, and as soon as you see the moon rising ahead of you above the horizon, that's when you start your burn. That does tend to be less than ideal, though, because for the optimal, if you're really concerned about, here's that external view there. Yeah, you can see the lander. We've got two segments there, and I've got to deploy this antenna. So I guess that kind of invalidates the challenge. We're not entirely in IVA mode. Ooh. But yeah, you can see we've got all the science packages there, the lander section, and our return stage. The return stage alone has 1.5 kilometers per second of delta V, which is way more than we really need for something like this. But lots of margin for error. So we could probably land at like 4 different sites and pump fuel down from the return stage. But now we just coast up. We're at 76 kilometers altitude. We're just going to coast up to Apoapsis, and momentarily we will start our burn at about 30 or 40 or maybe even 50 seconds to Apoapsis. Yeah, we're just going to start. There go the engines. We're going to get that last kick out of them here, the last 100 meters per second. And that way, we shouldn't have too much fuel to drain from our transfer stage. I like to do this kind of 3-stage, so I have a big launcher stage, and then I have a nice low thrust but high efficiency transfer stage that has just enough delta V to complete the burn and get us the rest of the way to the moon. I'm just going to wait until we get closer to Apoapsis. There's no real reason for me to be this nitpicky about having a circular orbit. I just like to do it because I am a perfectionist. Coasting along, 40 seconds to Apoapsis. Going to ignite the engine there, just get ready once we hit 30. Our thrust to weight ratio of this stage is 0.7, which is generally pretty good considering if we were in a real world constraint. Generally, you don't want to have very high thrust to weight ratios on your upper stages, just because they tend to be, high efficiency engines, and you have large payloads, so you don't have great thrust to weight. So we're just going to burn about 300 meters per second here. I'm really just eyeballing the numbers. This kind of orbit is something I've flown many times, and IVA is not really different. It's just a different method of activating the engines in different places that I'm reading off these numbers. So getting close now, 1.9 kilometers per second. Getting close to our Apoapsis, 20 seconds. Although that time is slowing down. The game is still running pretty slow. But we are getting to our orbit, 2 kilometers per second now. 1.8 kilometers per second surface speed, although I don't really care about that much. The orbital speed is what's important here, because the surface has flung us along. It has given us its boost of however fast the planet rotates. I think it's like 175 meters per second at the equator, which is why you like to launch eastward and close from the equator, because you save that much delta V. And if you launch westward from the equator, not only do you have to burn another 200 meters per second to counter that, we have to burn another 200 on top of it to make up for the actual orbital speed that you want to get. Because if you just burn westward 200 meters per second, now your orbital speed would be 0 instead of 200. Whereas if you did it eastward, it would be 400, because those velocities add, whereas the other one, they cancel. And that's really just me talking to fill time. Now that we're at Apoapsis, you can see our descent light has come on. So we're now falling back, but I don't really care about that because we are very close to circular orbit. Negative 70 kilometers there, that's pretty close. Just getting up there. Very low thrust, this burn is taking a very long time, and we're still at reduced speed. But we're eventually going to get there, slowly but surely, in a matter of a few business days, I'm sure. Well, let's look at that. Orbit mode. you can see our periapsis. I think the way this is oriented is so that the apoapsis of the orbit is on the left side there, and it rotates everything else to fit. Which, if I was the developer of this mod, is probably not how I would have done it, but I'm not the developer, so, it's not really my place to say. I'm just going to deal the hand I'm given. I'm going to orient back along prograde now. 60 kilometers, 70, and 80. And there we are. We're in orbit, but we're at the 25-minute mark, so our actual landing will have to be in a future episode. Until next time.